Hello and welcome back to Crash Course Cryosphere. Tom and I have been working very hard on getting these episodes ready for you, and we're excited to finally release the second half of the series. Now, this episode you're not actually going to see very much of me. This is because the Gravel Monkey has decided that he's going to hijack the entire episode to talk about some really quite technical stuff. Now, to avoid this getting confusing, I've introduced the... So hopefully that'll keep things understandable. This episode also features the first in our series of interviews with scientists who work in the cryosphere, so you've got that to look forward to. But the main focus of this video are cold and warm glaciers. Roll the intro.
A glacier's thermal regime, by which we mean the temperature throughout the glacier and in particular at its bed, is one of the most important factors in controlling subglacial processes. Meltwater, perhaps for obvious reasons, is very tightly linked to the thermal regime that the glacier is experiencing, and the availability or otherwise of it controls processes such as debris entrainment, transport and deposition, subglacial sliding, and outburst floods, for example. These sorts of factors all have a strong influence on glacier velocity. As we previously discussed, glacier velocity cannot just be explained by creep, and the processes that I just mentioned and that we'll look at further now are one of the key reasons why glaciers flow faster than can be explained by just creep. Cold-based glaciers are those that are experiencing sub-zero temperatures throughout their mass, and particularly at the bed, throughout the year. No matter the season, whether it's melt season, summer, winter, the bed of the glacier is frozen to its substrate underneath. This means that there's no free water at the bed of the glacier, and therefore ice creep is the primary means by which these glaciers move. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, this means these rates of movement are very slow, and in addition to that, relatively little landscape alteration takes place, as you don't have water moving debris around and helping to create features such as moraines. Warm-based glaciers are those at which the bed of the glacier is at the pressure melting point for the entirety of the year, or almost all of the year. This means that there's always liquid water at the base of the glacier. Whether that's in a channel or whether in a distributed system, it's still there. This has several implications, one of which is that you're going to see an increase in velocity of the overall ice pack. This is because the water acts as a lubricant and due to several other mechanisms which we'll come into later. This water at the bed of the glacier tends to form very distinctive drainage systems, which form their own spectacular hydrological networks. And these networks can vary on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month, season-to-season. And these variations in the drainage network construction and variation can lead to a lot of the variations we see in glacier velocity. Perhaps the most interesting thermal regime is that of polythermal glaciers. These are glaciers where the bed is both frozen and not frozen to its bed. This means that water can be moving or not, and you can have acceleration or deacceleration. And this creates a whole range of interesting thermal regime patterns, hydrological patterns, and velocity flow fields. Also, just because it's really cool, you can sometimes get really warm-based glaciers, which is when a volcano erupts underneath a glacier. This tends to happen a lot in Iceland, and some of you may remember the Eyjafjallajökull eruption, which caused chaos to air traffic throughout Europe. Now, the glacier doesn't always get completely blown through, as happened in the Eyjafjallajökull case. And instead, you get formations of lava underneath the glacier and also a large buildup of meltwater. This meltwater can be released incredibly quickly in very destructive floods called Jökulhlaups. But also, the formations of lava and bedrock and so on that are created under these glaciers during these eruptions are very similar to some landforms we see on Mars. So one of the current research frontiers is looking at Iceland and seeing if we can use that as a proxy, particularly in terms of its subglacial volcanic eruptions, for proxies of landforms that we see on Mars.
Hello, do you miss me? There isn't actually any point to this voiceover, I just wanted to try and contribute to the episode and I felt like I hadn't yet. Oh well. Back to Tom, he's got some more complicated terminology for you.
The glaciers and ice caps that best align with the simple creep we discussed in episode 5 only really exist in the high polar environments where cold-based glaciers dominate. When these high polar glaciers are frozen to their bed, the frictional adhesive strength is very high. However, in temperate glaciers, where the base is at a pressure melting point, two other processes start to dominate. These are subglacial deformation and basal sliding. Whilst it has recently been shown that some basal sliding can take place in cold-based glaciers, this is typically very minimal. Indeed, it's been shown that under cold-based glaciers, you can preserve landforms and landscapes from previous glaciations. This just goes to illustrate how low the landscape alteration potential is of cold-based glaciation. For us, the most important thing here to focus on is that the weight of the material above an unconsolidated bed means that that bed experiences stress and strain. That stress and strain is imparted from the ice above and causes the material to deform, which then helps enhance the flow of the ice itself. So what I'm going to try and demonstrate to you here is some simple shear, strain, and what happens when you put something under stress. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just simply apply pressure from above. And then we're going to try and watch and see what happens to the Pleistocene. As I apply the pressure, moderately evenly, you can hopefully see that the layers are just squidging together. Not much else is happening, they're just compacting. So that's simple pressure from above. Here comes the second test, and what we're going to try to do here is apply some slip whilst also applying pressure from above. Slip means you've got movement in one direction. Now as we slip here with pressure from above, we should hopefully shear the sediments. So as we shear them, we'll see the layers being sheared across. I'm going to try and apply this now. I don't know if you can see that, but what's happening at the bottom here is that the green Pleistocene, which is at the rear of the direction of slip, is being pulled up and forward into the orange layer. It's just about starting, so I'm going to try and give it a bit more welly and see if I can get a slightly better effect. So what I'm actually doing now is I'm cheating slightly. I'm now introducing pressure at an angle, which is of course having a greater effect than if I was just putting simple shear from above. All in the name of science! Oh, how I wish you were rougher, Mr. Perspex. It's just that you look so good on camera. If I take another break now from my exertions, hopefully you can see that we're now really getting some smearing of material from the green layer up into the orange. And you can hopefully see how the green material is being pulled up and folded into the orange Pleistocene. In case of the orange here, you can see the green is not upstanding from the Pleistocene. It has become part of that material. Because you have pressure being applied from above, along with slip, creating shear, with two impermeable materials, the green material cannot escape anywhere. I mean, it could squidge out slightly sideways, which is what it's doing, but because it can't escape and it's being sheared into the orange material, it's not above the orange layer. Hopefully you can see that these layers are perfectly flat on top. The green is not upstanding from the orange. The green has been effectively pushed and built into the orange material, creating this lovely shear structure. A couple of different models have been proposed to explain how this deformation takes place. One of these is the Bolton-Heimarsch model, and another one is the Coulomb plastic model. These are both quite advanced models and concepts, so we won't go into them here, but I suggest that it's a good place for interested people to do more reading.
Now, to give you a break from the science, we have our first interview with a real scientist who works with the cryosphere. And in this video, we're talking about landscapes that have been carved out by glaciers, but are underwater.
My name is Dr. Christine Batchelor. I'm a research fellow here at the Scott Polar Research Institute. My work is concerned with glacier and ice sheet reconstruction. So I look at the past, extent and dynamics of ice masses in order to better understand how they're working at the moment and how they're likely to behave in the future. So I didn't get the chance to study glaciers and ice sheets at school. I first encountered them during my undergraduate studies here in Cambridge. I really enjoyed the dissertation component of the course. My undergrad dissertation involved reconstructing the extent of a small glacier in South Wales during the Loch Lomond stadial around 11,000 years ago. I enjoyed this fieldwork component so much I stayed on to do a master's and a PhD at the Scott Polar Research Institute. I then continued to be a junior research fellow at Cambridge, where I conduct my own research on a daily basis and also do quite a lot of teaching for the university. We only have direct measurements of the cryosphere for the past 50 to 100 years. My research seeks to put the changes that we know about during these short timescales in their longer-term context. My research is also motivated by trying to understand the processes that take place at the bed of a glacier or ice sheet. This is a region which is really difficult to access directly, so it's easier to look to the record of where glaciers and ice sheets used to be in order to understand how sediment is eroded, transported and deposited by ice. My research is focused mainly on analysing evidence of past glaciation that's preserved in the marine environment. You do have landforms preserved from past glaciations on land. Many of you would have seen these, such as moraines, if you're walking in upland regions of the UK. However, the terrestrial landscape can become eroded by weathering and human activity. It's often better, therefore, to look at landforms that are preserved in the marine environment, in areas where glaciers used to be that are now under the sea. In order to analyse the marine environment, we go on research cruises and use three main methods. First of all, we use bathymetry, which is a way of measuring the depth of the seafloor to build up maps of the landforms that are preserved there. Secondly, we use sub-bottom profiling and seismic reflection data to analyse the sediments that are preserved beneath the surface of the seafloor. And thirdly, we use sediment cores in order to extract sediment beneath the seafloor and bring it back up to the lab to analyse. My research has involved going on a research cruise to Antarctica. I was on the James Clark Ross research vessel, which is due to be replaced in 2019 by the David Attenborough research boat. The most challenging part about fieldwork is dealing with being on a research vessel in rough seas whilst trying to analyse and interpret the data itself. I was down in Antarctica during the summer where you have 24-hour sunlight, so it actually becomes quite difficult to sleep, and there's always the risk of sunburn, which isn't something people usually think about when they go to Antarctica. My favourite part of going on research cruising is the environments that you get to see and the animals that you encounter. When I was down in Antarctica, I got to see element seals and Adelie penguins. This is an example of the type of map we make based on the depth of the sea floor. It's called a bathymetric map. The ice you can see is part of the Greenland ice sheet, and the more red colours are where there's shallower water, around 100 to 200 metres, and the bluer colours are where the water is down to around 600 metres. So from data such as this, we can see the depth of the seafloor in front of the modern glaciers, which is important for how they're likely to retreat. We can also analyse the landforms that are preserved on the seafloor. When icebergs carve off a glacier or ice sheet, their keels can sometimes scratch into seafloor sediments, creating features we call iceberg keel plough marks. An example of these plough marks is shown on this bathymetric image. Iceberg plough marks can be 10 metres or so deep and up to hundreds of metres across. This image shows a series of quite small plough marks cut by this one much larger plough mark. Analysing features such as this preserved on the seafloor can tell us about the size of the past ice mass, and they can also tell us about past oceanographic conditions that were operating at the time the icebergs were drifting around.
We'll be including more interviews with scientists in the coming episodes. Now it's back to Tom, and you'll finally get a chance to see me working with him in an experiment. Well, he's also going to go on to talk about... what is it? Got my notes. He's going to talk about his PhD thesis. Oh, no one's going to make it through this episode.
When we move to a hard bedrock setting, by which we typically mean a crystalline bedrock such as granite, which does not deform or break up that easily under the weight of the glacier, then some slightly different processes start to come in here. Most of the drag experienced comes from frictional drag from material embedded in the base of the glacier, and from form drag, which is the drag of the surface of the ice moving over the surface of the bedrock. The two primary mechanisms which create basal sliding here are enhanced creep and regelation. Regelation is the process by which melting is enhanced upstream of an obstacle. This is because as the ice comes down and it hits an obstacle, on the upstream side the pressure is increased. And when you increase pressure, more melting can take place. We can actually demonstrate this really well with a wire and ice block demonstration, which I'll get my glamorous assistant to come in and help me with now. So luckily my glamorous assistant has now arrived as if by magic, and now we're going to demonstrate regelation using this wire and this ice block. Now, hopefully what we're going to see here is that as the wire is applied to the top of the ice, even though it's insulated from the heat of my hand by the tape here, it will start to sink into the ice. This is because the pressure exerted by the wire will cause melting. Now, my glamorous assistant.
Ever happy to help.
Ever happy to help. Could you hold the ice block?
Yep.
In this sort of position?
Like a monolith.
Like a monolith. Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, let's go for that.
This way around?
No, other way.
Oh, that way. That way around?
Yeah, have your hands there.
Yep.
There you go. Right, now let's try this. Let's see if this works, and hopefully we get it on.
Let's see if I'm strong enough.
Yeah. Here we go. There we go. Pull it.
Oh yeah, it's. I can see it.
In? So what we're trying to simulate here, with mixed success, is the effect of increasing the pressure on a small surface on a block of ice. And it is very slowly because it's quite a thin wire that's very soft. So as I'm pulling it, I'm losing energy as the wire stretches. But luckily my glamorous assistant has guns. Now, if the wire was a bit wider and a bit rougher and a bit less stretchy, this would probably be going in quite a bit quicker. How far have we gone in there?
A little bit.
A little bit. So as we're pulling in at the corners where we can actually exert enough pressure. Right, I'm going to really pull on it now, and let's see how this goes.
You are stronger than you look.
Not a complete waste of oxygen.
Are we breaking?
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to switch?
Yeah, let's switch.
Okay.
Oh, God. Okay, right.
Hang on.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, shall we call that one there? And if we go to the close cap, we can actually see that the wire was very slowly sinking in. Obviously, this is not the best demonstration ever, because it turns out the wire is a bit too soft for the purpose we intended. But hopefully you get the idea.
I bloody hope so.
Creep is enhanced, hence enhanced creep, because the strain rate of ice varies non-linearly with the applied stress. This means that upstream of obstacles, where you have a higher stress level, creep is more enhanced than it is elsewhere, and therefore ice deforms very efficiently around an obstacle, effectively accelerating the ice as it moves over the obstacle. If we now draw the graph of enhanced creep and regelation on the same axes, we can now see that these two processes have a point at which they meet. This is called the controlling obstacle size, and it's the point at which efficiency is only lost if the obstacle size increases. This means there's a point at which the roughness of a bed will enhance the flow of the ice more than any other. This relationship between the two actually cropped up in my PhD thesis and ended up being quite an important part of it, because it turns out that when you look at the landscape that's left behind, you can see this controlling obstacle size taking place, or at least that's my hypothesis. My argument basically is that glaciers actually have a positive feedback system at the base of their beds, which means that they tend towards efficiency. You tend to get a more efficient bed, and a more efficient bed is actually a slightly rough bed. Not too big, not too small, just right. Water cavities also play an important role in basal sliding because they help to govern how attached and how coupled the glacier is to its bed. Water cavities are also important in basal sliding as they govern the degree of coupling between the bed and the ice. At a given threshold pressure, i.e. when the water cavities are growing and expanding, they will act to separate the glacier from its bed. This has the effect of reducing the frictional drag. All the little bits of stuff stuck in the bottom of the glacier are no longer in contact with its bed. This means the glacier's sliding will increase, and consequently, whole glacier velocity will increase as well. Other than this essential basal lubrication effect that the cavities have, there are two more important means by which this cavity expansion affects basal velocities. The first of these is the hydraulic jack mechanism, whereby pressure is increased at the top of the cavity, and therefore the glacier is literally jacked downstream. This increase in pressure also has an effect in terms of the third reason, which is by increasing the pressure in some areas, and therefore lifting the base off, you suddenly drop pressure to zero, and pressure is increased in other areas where the ice is still in contact. In these areas where the ice is still in contact, of course you stick more enhanced creep, because we discussed earlier, it varies non-linearly. Therefore, not only by reducing pressure in some areas you accelerate, by reducing that pressure and increasing it consequently in others, you increase acceleration there as well. So overall, rates of glacier motion are controlled by a combination of local and non-local factors. These factors can combine in perhaps unexpected ways, and this is what results in the rapid response of glaciers to climate change and water input.
This episode, we covered that the speed at which a glacier flows is determined by a combination of factors that work in addition to the velocity derived from ice creep, these being its thermal regime, meltwater, and subglacial deformation. That the thermal regime of a glacier is the temperature experienced by the ice at its bed. Warm-based glaciers typically have meltwater present due to being at the pressure melting point and therefore flow faster. Cold-based glaciers, on the other hand, are frozen to their bed, and that glacier flow is enhanced differently depending on whether or not the glacier is located on a hard bed or a soft bed. Unlike Brexit, these two hard and soft types are well defined. Thank you for watching Crash Course Cryosphere. If you have any questions about the stuff we talked about this week, then in the comments, Tom and I will be clearing up any misconceptions for 2 hours after this video is released. So if you have a question, get down there. Equally, if you'd like to learn more about anything we talked about this week, there are lots of links to references and further reading in the description. We'd like to thank you for watching, and also all of these people for helping make this series possible, and in particular the Recover project at Exeter University for helping us with funding, and the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge, where we are now, for being so accommodating and helping us in basically every way. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you next week.